very nice to be here. I see there's a lot of people who are new. Welcome. Nice to have you here. A lot of people who have been here before. Welcome. Nice to have you here. This is one of those sessions that I thought was about time to do. We've talked about, over the last longer period of time, tools and choices. I usually do kind of a meditation, a working piece of work in these sessions. But this whole process of ascension, which is simply a fancy word for your spiritual evolution, is something that is very much engaged with you right now, whether you're conscious of it or not conscious of it. Most people walking around on the planet are unconscious of this concept of ascension or growth in pretty much any way, shape, or form. But at the same time, they are all waking up, beginning to have an awareness that something's not right. And that's not meaning that it's broken. It's just that something doesn't feel the same. And so what I thought would be very useful is to talk about what is ascension and how does it work in terms of, I can give you a very specific how does it work with regard to Mastering Alchemy and what's done. Now, you're constantly ascending. You're constantly engaged with experiencing yourself in new ways. And in a simple way, that's what ascension is all about. But as a spiritual being, being conscious of it as a spiritual being, having an experience, is a little different than being conscious or being in the motion of learning a new skill or figuring out a new direction to get to the new mall in town, third dimensional type of things where we've all played. So let me kind of set this up in a way that let's start talking about this from how did we get here in the first place. So this aspect, what many people refer to as the fall of consciousness, and what many people refer to is pretty much directly from the Bible or from some book that relates to a spiritual belief system that's on the planet. None right or wrong. But in a lot of those books, there is a reference that leads one to believe that there was something bad, particularly in the Christian Bible and in the Old Testament. There's talks about this fallen angel and this war or these problems that went on. To a great extent, there was really no fallen angel and there was no war. One of the things that is constantly in motion is that the Creator wishes to know itself. You know, and actually let me stop right here because many of you are new. The real question you want to ask when somebody starts a conversation like this is, how do you know this? What you're about to tell me, how do you know this? And I'm so amazed at how seldom that question ever gets asked. So what I'm going to tell you is what I know, and how I know this is, in my reality, I do something three different ways, or at least for this purpose, there's three different aspects. When I go to sleep at night, I go to sleep really pretty much just like you go to sleep. You know, you lay down, put your head in a pillow, and pretty much within a few seconds you're really out of the body, or at least on your way out of the body. We can talk about that in a moment too. And every night you go home. You leave the body. You leave the body in what's called the etheric body, not the astral body. We'll talk about that in a minute also. And you go home. You go back to all that is. And then you come back to the body. But as you come back to the body, one of the differences I've found between me and most everybody else I've ever met is I remember where I was, and most everybody forgets where they just were. And so in that context of where I was, I have awareness. Not better than, just simply an awareness. The second way I do what I do and understand what I understand is in this space that we call spiritual abilities, clairvoyance, clairaudience, and many others, 26 abilities we can run out. In those abilities, you have access to this state of consciousness, all that is. In my reality, that state of consciousness and how it's unfolded over years and years is if I wish to ask a question, I get an answer. Very much all spoken to in Mastering Alchemy. But the answer comes, the answer exists where the question is asked. But more specifically, over this last 10, 15 years, my relationship with a consciousness that's referred to as archangelic realms, lords of light, these great beings that we get to play with all the time if we were to look up and see them more or less, they've become pretty much a great source of information. And that's where most of this information comes from. Talking to Metatron, Uriel, Yeshua, Jesus, as most would call, or many would call, etc. So it's in that context what I'm about to say is developed. The third way, though, is over the process of having these conversations, back in about 2003, one of those conversations with Metatron was a statement that said, he said to me, there's a path that we believe that has never ever been walked. And if it was created and followed, it would create an ascension for those who follow it, walk that path, and at the same time it will elevate the earth back to its fully 12th dimensional Christed status. Christed is a statement of the creator, not a religion. And in that process, the ability to have all of humanity evolve into a kind of fifth and higher dimensional reality would be available. So that's where what I'm about to say comes from. So please ask questions about that when we get to this place. So from the standpoint of this fall of consciousness, there was no war. There was no bad angel. There was really actually even not a lot of things went wrong. The creator gods and others were interested in creation, adding to all that was. And in that process, one of the things that became an experiment, an expression or an expansion, was this concept of physicalness. Now, to you and me, physicalness is all there is. And so it's obvious it must be a massive part of all that is and very, very important. But in the context of all that is being so vast, physicalness is an experience. Physicalness is like a single drop of water in the grandest oceans of all the universes. Everything else is non-physical. But to us, physicalness is the game that we know. So, but we used to know this full awareness, full consciousness of non-physical and physical for a long time. And then a number of things happened, fall of consciousness. So one of the things that went on is as physicalness was begun to be created and experienced and experimented with, it was a very exciting concept. And so non-physicalness would put its consciousness into something physical and experience itself. It's almost that simple. And then the physicalness began to be more complex. And as they played, this word density came into being. Density simply being consciousness that became more compressed, more dense. And so the process was creating more density and more density and more density. And we think about density as the table, the chair, the physicalness, the earth, the tree. But really density is thought forms. You think in thought forms. There's a density to your thought. You know what a light, airy, happy thought feels like. You know what an angry, ugly, mean thought feels like. You know, it's like put one in each hand and kind of see what happens to your hands. One kind of goes, yeah, this is really heavy, dense. But before we got to this stage, we were very airy and not even physical as we understand physical. There was no physicalness as we understand it. It wasn't that dense. It was very airy, very much in concept and in consciousness that had a tangibleness to it. That process was really exciting. And they kept saying, what happens if we make it a little more dense and a little bit more dense and a little bit more dense? And in the process of doing that, just like any experiment that doesn't have a clear set of directions, sometimes you kind of end with a dead end. You don't get the conclusion you wanted. Sometimes the experiment kind of blows up on you. It just like didn't work. This is one of those that simply didn't exactly work. It wasn't bad, it just didn't work the way they thought it would work. And so it got to a certain point, we begin to know density in the concepts of Lemuria. And so we think, gee, that's when it all started. Oh, no, it started way before that. But Lemuria began to be tangible and visible. The earth began to be more solid, tangible, and visible. And then it got into Atlantis, much more tangible and visible, and etc. So there's a lot more to the story, but kind of in that space. But something didn't work in simple terms. It wasn't bad, it just didn't work. And in the process of that, there was a number of decisions that said, let's see what happens if we try to salvage or take care of what we've got and turn it into something. In the process of that, a fully conscious awareness that was once had by all of us began to experience separation. It began to have aspects that just in the density, it didn't work. It was too dense. It was like trying to put a toothpick into an ice cube. It just doesn't work. It's too dense. So in order to have this level of experience that we have now, there was an aspect where the mental and the emotional body, which were always one before that, were separated. Many parts of the brain turned off. Many aspects of your awareness into this multiple consciousness, multiple dimensional consciousness, simply disconnected because you couldn't carry that much awareness in this very compressed density. So, fall of consciousness, much more to say about it, but just let's leave it right there for the moment. So, in the process, and I kind of always make a joke about this, but in real terms, it's not a joke. It is how it happened. So in real terms, many beings, conscious beings, wished to have this experience that you and I have. And in the process of, especially right now, in this last 100-year period, in this last period from about 1940 to right now, very big intention to come into a body. So I used to make a joke and said, you know, you wanted to come, others wanted to come, and the Creator said, let me explain what we're going to do. And in order to go here, you have to put a bag over your head, and you're going to forget me, and you're going to forget yourself. And you're going to go down here into this dark place, and you're going to bump around and try to figure out your way home, how to make it work again. And you specifically, pushed your way to the front of the line and said, send me. And many of you really did a great job. You said, send me, and how deep into that darkness should I go? And the Creator smiled, and you said, watch this. And here you are, deep into that density with a disconnected mental, emotional, spiritual, physical structuring. Most of you is turned off, and you're bumping around going, what did I do to myself? And you're in a very compressed density, third, fourth dimension, that has structure to it that makes no sense based on how you know yourself. And so here we are at a point where Metatron says there's a path, there's a shift in consciousness, there is an opportunity, a whole new operating structure is being put in place, has been put in place 2011 and 12, and we are now going to be able to put back ourselves into a growth state of evolution, of ascension. So, very short tour of fall of consciousness. But right here, one of the things that is happening right now is everyone is starting to wake up. Many people are structured in the third dimensional reality, which has a number of aspects to it that are challenging. Third dimension is very rigid in its structure. It operates on a linear timeline, past, present, future, then you die. It operates in conditionalness. In the third dimension, there is nothing unconditional. Everything is conditional. You live in a third and fourth dimension at the same time. There is some minor aspects of unconditional in the fourth dimension. So sometimes you bump into that. But for the most part, there is in that rigid structure, as we, you, me, all begin to wake up, there is an aspect of fear. And that fear and resistance and words like resentment and jealousy and anger are all actions that are taken without any thought most of the time, part of the third dimension. So in those words, in that structure, in that level of reactionary consciousness, which is mostly unconscious, you find yourself in this third dimensional box. In order to get out of that space, there has to be different choices made. And for the most part, you have to step into a fourth dimensional space to begin to experience choice. Choice does not exist in the third dimensional box. In the third dimension, sometimes you get into a very present time, here I am space, but it's a reactionary, oh my God, this wasn't supposed to happen. You're in present time and you're in reaction. Whereas in the fourth dimension, you're in present time and do you want pizza or spaghetti? Choice. It's being very simple. But choice is an enormous step from an unconscious state of past and future to a present conscious state of right now. That simple statement is an enormous step in an individual's ascension. Master Kuthumi once said to me, the longest part of this journey is from the third dimension to the fifth dimension. So let's talk about that part of the journey, your ascension, your awakening, your awareness. In this process of this last 40 years, 50 years, actually 60 years of time, maybe even 80 years, 1940, there has been a constant lightening up, loosening up of the definitions, the structures of that third dimension, of the density of consciousness. The density is loosening up. There's a little bit more fluidity, flexibility. Many people coming into that period of time from about 1946, huge, at the end of the war, that baby boom population, it came into a body configured differently than any of the previous generations. It had choice and awareness that the others did not have up until that point. And so all through the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, into this 2000 period of time, there was new considerations beginning to be formed at a massive expansion. Just look at the computers, look at technology, look at consciousness, look at the spiritual aspect of consciousness on the planet. As it came to 2011, it was said that there will be a shift, and that shift will come in 2012. In real terms, that shift came That shift is very real, and it's an enormous action that has occurred. But one of the things that occurred prior to that shift in 2012, something had to occur that was promised over 2,000 years ago. That was the promise that Yeshua made, that the Christ consciousness would return. In 2011, on 11/11, the return of Christ consciousness happened. A lot to talk about with that, but just real simple. And it was replaced in everyone's heart, in that sacred heart, right in the center of your chest. It was a matrix, it was a geometry, it was a structure, and it simply had the capacity to begin to hold this aspect of the Creator, which is what that is. And so it returned. With that return in 2012, effectively a new operating system was placed into the computer. It no longer served the way it used to. The operating system was upgraded, it was rebooted, it was started, and an entirely new structure is going on within everybody, part of the Ascension. So as that occurs, one of the things that was stated in 2012 is that from this moment on 12/12/12, there will never be another child born into that third dimension structure. And so now you see these kids, the 2-year-olds, the 1-year-olds, the ones that are being born right now, they operate fully differently than any that have been born before them. They are conscious, they are wired, and they have the capacity to embrace these levels of Christ consciousness and many other factors that allow them to work. Many of these children are coming in very fully connected to themselves in ways that most of us cannot even imagine right now. So the beginning of this ascension process for many. So the ascension process for you and me is very different than it is for these 1- and 2-year-olds. The kids that are born from 1987 till 2012, they are all wired very differently. They're the intermediary group that will lead these 1- and 2-year-olds into a state when they become 20, 30, 40, the world will be absolutely a different place at that point. So, but what about you? How do you begin to have this process of ascension? How do you begin to know yourself as a fully Christed being that has full consciousness, that has the ability to be engaged with Source, Creator, engaged with these conversations with the archangelic realm, the Lords of Light, the Ascended Masters? How does that happen? So let's just discuss how that happens. One of the things about each one of us is we only know what we know, and we don't know what we don't know. And many times in that structure, because we don't know what we don't know, the rational mind makes up stories about how it should be. It's never validated often, or many times, but it's, well, this is how it should be. This must mean this. How many times have you come to a stoplight and you didn't know which way to turn, and you said, I think we should go left, and then you validate it, you justify it, you absolutely know, yeah, left is the right turn. You've never been to that intersection before. And we do this all the time. We create a story that validates our thinking. It happens instantaneously, and for the most part, it happens irrationally. But that's the third dimension that we operate in. In the process of making this shift from the third to the fifth dimension, not hard. In fact, it's actually very simple, but it's not easy. And the reason it's not easy is because we have these belief systems, these habits, these considerations, these absolutes. This is true and this is not true. Very established in our structure of belief. So in order to basically make this shift. And many of you are waking up, and many of you have this internal driver that says there's something else, that internal guidance system. And so when you begin to listen to that internal guidance system, and you begin to have a structure to walk through, not a truth, simply a structure. Mastering Alchemy says, do this, what happened? It's not a truth, it's not a philosophy, it's not anything other than do this, what happened? But when you begin to operate in a structure of choice, you begin to have an expanded awareness. So one of the first things that occurs is, or is necessary, is figuring out where the center of your head is. Now, many of you heard me talk about this kind of thing, these pieces before, but where is the center of your head? It's not so much where it is can you get there? Can you simply bring your attention behind your eyes and observe through your eyes? Not go to, not be distracted by, just simply observe the world around you from behind your eyes. The other thing is that can you distinguish or discern between what is you and what is not you? For the most part, we are influenced all day long by other people's thoughts and other people's emotions. I'll go as far as say most of the thoughts that you think and most of the beliefs that you hold are not yours. They never were yours. All day long you have thoughts running through you that are not yours. So how do you begin to discern what's mine and what's not mine? And so one of the simple tools is figuring out where the edge of your aura starts and stops and create a point of distinction at that point, at the edge of the aura, and then bring your energy to your side. Very simple concept. But when you stay on your side of this point of delineation that says, from my heart to this point is me, and everything on the other side of that point is Shakespeare's theater to entertain me. All of a sudden, where you walk into your workplace and you're happy, but all of the people are grumbling, and then within a couple of minutes you're grumbling, what happened to happy? So when you learn to begin to discern what is mine and what is not mine, those emotions and those thoughts of other people begin to have less and less of an effect. You begin to observe and choose in present time. I said that a minute ago. Very big, one of the first big steps of all of this. Grounding. How do you get rid of those thoughts that run through your head all day long that aren't yours? It's like having a song playing in your head that's not yours. Grounding. Most people say they know how to ground. But there's two aspects to a grounding cord. One is an emotional release of energy. One is an intellectual, mental release of energy. So when the center of your head, the rose, the grounding begins to happen, your ability to stay in present time, to observe, to choose, and then to act rather than react and then apologize for it later begins to be a big piece of the shift. One of the other pieces of the shift that is significant is how do I get out of this reactionary state besides those three little tools? I forget, I lose my space, I get pushed around by everything that's going on in my world. So one of the pieces of your evolution is beginning to recognize something in a very different way than most of the time it's looked at. And that is, you know words like happy and certain and capable and gracious and kind and respectful. And if I ran out a whole list of them, and I ran out a list of ugly and mean and rotten, and I said, which one would you like to choose, which list? 100% of the people will choose the one that says happy well-being. So if that's the list you choose, why do you spend so much time in miserable, unhappy, I'm not sure I'm okay, I don't think they like me? It's kind of a question. So, but the answer really is, I don't know how to get out of that. I don't know where I start and I stop. I don't know what's me. I don't know those emotions are mine or are they somebody else's. The thoughts I'm thinking, why am I thinking those thoughts? In that third dimensional, non-definitional space, those questions come up. In that third dimensional space, one of the very fundamental things is we give up our seniority to the external world, to the mom, dad, the teacher, the minister, who all have a better idea of how to run our lives than we do. They simply say, what's wrong with you? And then you try to figure it out for the rest of your life. And the simple answer is, nothing has ever been wrong with you. It's impossible to not be okay. So I'm being real simple at the beginning. I'll get more complex in a minute. So once you begin to recognize that what other people think of you is really none of your business, and many times when they say something, they don't even remember they say it 2 minutes later. But you walk around with it trying to figure out what did you do wrong. I do that, you do that, we all do that. So when you begin to build structure in as a means of discerning, all of a sudden you have different choices. So those words, happy, certain, capable, senior, gracious, kind, respectful, when you begin to recognize them not as intellectual words, but you can close your eyes and then think to yourself or say the word certain and then ask your body what certain is, your body will tell you something very different. You'll sit up, your shoulders go back, you take a little deeper breath, you feel differently when you ask the body to show you what the vibration of a word is. When you begin to play at that, this is a huge step in very simple terms. When you begin to start being a word, start holding it within you, within your thought, within your emotion, within the physicalness of your body, the colors and the energy and the aura all change. So you've seen people when they're sad and they don't look happy, and you're reading their energy. When they're happy, their energy field is very different. So when you begin to take a word and build a platform of words, happy, certain, capable, and you begin to put them into a geometry. So here's another piece. In physicalness, what makes the difference between physicalness and non-physical is structure of geometry. Now keep it very simple as a triangle. 3 lines put together. They create a strength, they create a platform, if you would, they create a stability. But when you begin to put 3 words together and you can feel the vibration of those, you begin to create a platform that allows you to step outside of the day-to-day noise of everybody being upset, unhappy, consumed by their day, and then they go home and fall in bed because they're exhausted. When you start to create a space that allows you to be in well-being, happy, certain, capable, respectful, the energy in the body begins to change rather dramatically. The reason it changes is because what you think and how you draw an emotion to it tells the body how to experience itself. So when you walk around all day worried about something that may happen, and I hope something that once upon a time happened, it doesn't ever happen to me again, and that's where your focus is unconsciously in your mental and emotional body, and you are walking around in that space all day long, you are killing the body. The body goes into a state of reaction. It begins to be in irritation, it begins to be inflamed, it begins to create swelling, and it begins to break. Goes into a state of dis-ease. It's in that process that we walk around all day long, and basically the body can't take it after about 40, 50, 60 years. When you start to shift your thought and your emotion into a state of walking around on your side of that point of discernment, I'm going to call that a rose because that's what we use as the tool to create the edge of the aura. When you stay on your side of the rose, you're grounded, you're in the center of your head, and you are discerning, is that my state of being or is that I'm looking at, or do I wish to be in the state of well-being? That concept, that point of discerning, that concept begins to bring about a level of consciousness. You begin to take the density out of the word consciousness. Remember, I said density was that compression of consciousness. So when you start to get into well-being, happy, certain, capable, those kind of words, two things happen. You begin to loosen up the compression of the density of consciousness. You have more choice. But more specifically is you begin to create an alignment with you in that internal guidance system in the heart. That's a very fundamental set of things that I just said, but they are the building block that will take you into your ascension, those simple structures. Simple is correct, but simple is not easy because I'm so used to being like a freight train at 90 miles an hour, and Jim's here saying, well, just turn right. You just turn right. It'll be fine. And it's like, no, you don't understand. I'm going to crash. No, just turn right. Just be a word. It'll all work. And it does, but it takes a little bit of time to believe you have a different choice. So this is where it begins to be interesting from this point of these words. One of the things that also happened in the fall of consciousness is you lost a geometry that used to be very stable around you. It gave you the capacity to discern, just like the rose we just talked about. But there is a geometry that's called an octahedron. Four-sided pyramid on the top, four-sided pyramid on the bottom. It's what used to hold your aura in a contained space that you could manage yourself with words like certainty and clarity. But over time, in the fall of consciousness, that octahedron fell apart, or it just simply began to be not paid attention to, and it stopped being available. So one of the first geometries that you build is this octahedron, really very simple, and it creates a stability. But almost more important than the stability is it's an antenna. It's just like the antenna that used to be on top of your house. Many people don't even remember that. But you turn the antenna and the television works. The octahedron begins to be an antenna. As you start to get more clear about these words and this sense of yourself and your presence and these awarenesses that start to become more available, you change that geometry, that octahedron, very simply into what's called the Star Tetrahedron. It's a different geometry. Without trying to explain that, most of you know what that is. And so it's an easy set of exercises. It's not complicated. But that becomes an even greater antenna. It begins to have more access to higher consciousness. It begins to open up this sacred heart, this area within that internal guidance system begins to be more available. That Star Tetrahedron will ultimately turn into another geometry called a cube. And so and all of them are very easy transitions, but all of them provide structure in a density that allows you to do things that are simply not available to you right now. The wiring isn't in place, and the consciousness is too compressed to be able to make choice. So that geometry begins to play a pretty fundamental role in all of this. So the geometry plays a part, but another aspect of this is in your consciousness, you start to become aware of what is called the rays of creation. Now, many people know about the rays of light. They've been taught by some very interesting people. Saint Germain, one of the principles talking about the rays of light. But the rays of light come out of the rays of creation. And these rays are not so much beams of light or color patterns. They are huge energetic structures of consciousness. If I was to be kind of absurd, but if you can get the concept of this, you take a huge corporation like Apple or Intel or General Motors or, BMW groups. Those are massive groups of consciousness. They do many different things. They have many applications. They have many different unrelated or what appear to be unrelated aspects to other parts of that consciousness. But like a massive corporation, it is a functioning entity that provides opportunity. Now, I'm just making a reference to define the concept of energetics. These rays hold tremendous consciousness. Everything about you, everything, is created through these rays. So as you begin to have definition of what these rays are, how they work, you begin to start to move into a place at the beginning of putting yourself back together. And one of the main aspects of putting yourself back together is being able to bring that mental and emotional body back into a singular alignment. They were never meant to be two different things. When they come back into a singular alignment, you begin to be able to have a thought and then bring an emotion to it. You can have a thought that says happy, and then you can bring an emotion that demonstrates happy. You can amplify it like really happy, or you can just have it allowed at a comfortable level where there's a pleasant smile that goes along with the word happy. But it's a choice that begins to be made in terms of how you think and how you utilize emotion, feelings, sensations to bring about a desired result in your creation. Now, this is where you also begin to be reminded you're a creator being. And as a creator being, you create. But the thing about the rays is you've been using them every instant of your existence. You use them to create right now, everything you do. It just doesn't distinguish between distorted creations and good creations. There's no distinction between something that really works or something that doesn't work. That's you as a consciousness being able to be clear about your intention. And so you start to step into this aspect of awareness, of understanding more fully the power of intention and the ability to hold your attention on your intention. Here, too, something begins to happen. In that third dimensional reality, we have been trained to move away from ourselves. So go find the answer, or go ask somebody what they think, or I'll look it up. So in that third dimensional reality, fourth dimensional reality also to a great extent, we are constantly moving away from ourselves. As you begin to bring this mental and emotional body back together, you start to have an awareness of many things. For example, there are numbers of levels of thought, layers of thought, and you use these all the time. Sometimes you get very quiet and you think, and there's no engagement in your thought. You're just thinking, I wonder how that works. There's no leaning or need. There's another layer of thought where you start to say, gee, I've got to get the quart of milk, and I should do it when I get gas, and you're leaning. You're out into the future. That happens in another layer of thought. So when you begin to recognize this kind of third, fourth, fifth, sixth layer of thought, seventh layer of thought, where the thought that thought you into existence and you think together. These layers of thought that become available, it's in these layers of thought where you start to begin to bring that mental and emotional body back into a singular state. So In that process, these rays begin to offer tools, applications. For example, you walk around with, I say you, all of us, walk around with a set of beliefs from that third dimensional structure that is formed in different configurations, but basically they say, you're not okay. You're not attractive, you don't fit, you're not smart, you'll never amount to anything. What's wrong with you? If you stop and take a moment and step back and get out of the emotion of that really uncomfortable thought and emotion and just look at it, if you could trace it back, what you realize is every single one of those thoughts is because somebody else said it to you or demonstrated a reaction that led you to believe you are not okay. But the thing about being a creator being is you're always creating. And when you begin to step into this fourth, fifth dimensional space, you don't screw things up. Oh, you may get an answer that didn't work. Or you may create an experiment like baking a cake and then realizing you misread the instructions and it said 1 teaspoon of salt, not 1 tablespoon of salt. So, yeah, the brownies didn't come out real good. Are you a failure? No, the experiment didn't come out perfectly. Go back and look at the instructions, do it again, try it differently. That's what the whole purpose of being a human being was all about. You can't make a mistake. You can't screw it up. You can't be wrong. You can get an answer that doesn't give you the exact desired outcome. But when you go and you start to play with these rays, and you can begin to look at I'm not okay, and many of the words that have followed you around, like isolation or embarrassment or hiding or sarcastic, many times those words that play out in your reality as experiences that you are carrying with you, when you stop and look at them, would it be interesting to you if you had a set of structures, tools, that simply could take embarrassment and remove it from your mental, emotional structure? Gone. Not therapy, but a different format on which to begin to look at those thoughts that say, I'm not okay. They never were yours. Would you like to remove them without having to go through the emotional body? So the rays are what allowed you to create those thoughts. The rays are what allow you to dismantle those thoughts, reconfigure them, put in another structuring of thought and emotion. Beginning steps of your ascension, but absolutely essential steps. Here, too, you begin to play in an aspect of your ascension where you start to interact with the archangelic realm. And this is where it gets really interesting. Now, I'm talking Mastering Alchemy just as a pathway. But in this realm, you too, whether you do that pathway or not, you start to become conscious enough to where you can begin to use some of these skill sets like clairvoyance, clairaudience, it's a telepathy. They're all tools that are there for you to use. But you can't use them when you're worrying about and hoping past future. They are only available, and think about it, you've had great thoughts when you were present and you were quiet and you were in a layer of thought where you were not engaged with the world around you. Many times we call that meditation, but really it's a very conscious walking around space. So in this place, though, you begin to do a number of things. One of the things that happens in Mastering Alchemy at this point is the lower 3 chakras. It is astonishing to me that they work as well as they do. They are broken, fragmented, they are partly shut down, they just don't work in many ways. And so about this point of this level of consciousness in your ascension, there is an engagement that occurs with Master Kuthumi, Archangel Gabriel, and Archangel Michael. And you and they reconstruct those lower 4 chakras, bring them into a balance and bring them into a functional state of operation. Now, there's lots to this that happens once those chakras are put back together. You begin to be able to start to bring that mental, emotional body. You begin to have the interaction between the physicalness and the higher self. You begin to play in a place where you start to recognize you are the soul. Now, the soul is massive, and yet you are that one creation, that one extension of the soul that was requested to come and have a set of experiences. And it was that relationship between soul and spirit and creator that created you that said, I'll put the bag over my head and I'll go play. And you did, and you're here. But this is the construct to go home. So this begins to be now really interesting because you are able to stay on your side of the rose, you're able to play in layers of thought, you're able to observe, choose, and then act. The chakras are beginning to operate differently, and right about this point, you begin to lose all your friends. Or maybe I shouldn't tell you that part. Okay, I'll tell you that part. So what I mean by that is where you've been hanging out in that third dimensional reality, in those words of, anger, rage, resentment, unhappy, I'm not good, I don't deserve, all that stuff, all of a sudden that begins to be viewed differently. And in the process of that being viewed differently, you start to have a sense of yourself that no longer is that comfortable playing in those spaces of I'm not okay. Oh, believe me, you still carry that baggage for some time longer, but you begin to recognize I'm not that. That's not who I am. And in that process, you begin to many times have a disconnect between people you've known. Now, in real terms, this has been happening to you all your life. Every time you begin to take on a new interest, a new hobby, a new boyfriend, a new girlfriend, other people fall out of your life. New people come into your life. Same thing here, but on a very elevated level. You begin to be clear about you. Now, you don't know you, and you're starting to lose many of your old reference points, part of your ascension. You cannot take your baggage with you on this journey. And so those pieces start to fall away. And for some, it's kind of awkward. But at the same time, it's like I'm liking who I'm becoming. Those two things seem to happen simultaneously in watching people for numbers of years go through this process. About that time, something else happens that is really significant. You begin to be introduced to a different operating system in the body. So you have those 7 chakras, and they're configured in a way that functions well or poorly for that being a third, fourth dimensional person. But you're no longer being that person. You're starting to shift into a different state of consciousness. To do it, a different operating system is necessary. So this operating system is very interesting. It begins to it rearranges the relationship between the 4th chakra, the thymus gland, let's call it the thymus center as a gland in the physical body, and the 5th chakra. They begin to operate in a different configuration as one. And so this first triad is what that's called, meaning 3 components. 4th chakra, thymus center, 5th chakra. There is a second triad that gets created that is the 6th chakra, the pineal center, and a part of the brain called the medulla oblongata. Really important part of the brain, 98% shut down. Those 3 centers begin to operate as one, the second triad. And then the third triad is the 7th chakra, the 8th chakra, and what is referred to as the soul star, where the consciousness of the soul is held. It's an interface between the soul and you in this physical form. those three centers, 7, 8, and Soul Star, begin to operate as a unit. As you begin to spin these centers, and spinning them is a funny word, a better word would be, or concept, is you know what a rheostat looks like, on your wall. And you walk in, the light switch, dark room, and you just raise the rheostat and the light begins to get brighter and brighter and brighter. In a way, the word spin is not correct. It's really kind of raise the rheostat would be. And the centers begin to become radiant in light. And they are in motion, but it's not a motion that spins in any particular direction. In that one single action, based on all of the actions to that point, that level of consciousness, aspects of the brain, keep this really simple, begin to become engaged. Very little part of the brain begins to be engaged. And you start to be able to perceive your reality again differently. You begin to know yourself in some different configurations. Oh, wow, that whole hour just disappeared. So let me see if I want to tell you anything else. One more piece. You have multiple bodies. Now, you know it as the physical, the mental, the emotional, the spiritual body. But there is one body that is really important, and it's the etheric body. And this etheric body is where the chakras are located. They're not in the physical body. The chakras relate to the glandular system in the physical bodies. And the etheric body is the blueprint for the physical body. But over the fall of consciousness, when we began to understand fears and distrust, and we began to lie and distort things, that reflectiveness between those two bodies began to be somewhat distorted. Oh, they line up really perfectly, but it's like there's mud on one and there's a smear on the other. And so you don't have this really reflectiveness of this higher aspect of yourself that comes to play. So in this next part, and I'll talk about it next week, I'll give you some highlights, but I'll talk about it next week, is the whole process from this point on is beginning to bring that mental, emotional body together and beginning to transform how you think and how you hold those emotions into one perception. But it's the etheric body that begins to be altered, and much of that mud and smudging begins to drop away. Here you start to play with a whole lot of other concepts. You begin to play with color codes. Now the word code is spelled, it's not coatings like paint on the wall, it's C-O-D-I-N-G, color codings, the coding that goes on in the brain, the DNA structure. How is the coding, the software, altered to simply bring about this state of well-being? So let me leave the next piece of this to next week, but let me just tell you where this next piece goes. We really start to talk about how these triads work. We start to talk more about the color coding, the etheric body, the causal body, the oversoul, the Christed oversoul, and how you begin to loop your consciousness through all of those different points. You begin to start to recognize that the answer to your questions come where the question is asked. No movement necessary. You simply begin to know the answer. As all of this comes together, there's aspects where you begin to play with morphic fields in the bodies, and you start to play with the assembly of 7 layers of the light body. It's in that final formulation of the light body. We'll talk about how that works next week. You get to a place where that 5th dimensional body is engaged. It's a crystallized form of light. Now, are you going to turn into a 20-year-old when you turn that on? No. Are you going to significantly look different? No. Are you going to live longer or as long as you would like, if you would like? Yes. Are you going to be able to structure the vibrations, turn the brain on, alter the chemicals and the fluids, the secretions, the hormones in the physical body and raise it to a higher state of light and consciousness? Yes. Can you stay in that body as long as you would like? Yes. And you will choose to step out of it at some point.